Have you ever stopped to consider the impact of a childhood without love and care? A time in life that should be filled with protection and affection is, for some children, marked by silence, indifference, and loneliness. This kind of abandonment without visible signs leaves deep scars. And, more often than not, child neglect goes unnoticed, hidden behind closed doors and forced smiles. In this video, we'll explore how this emotional neglect shapes the lives of these children. From their earliest years through adulthood, take Opal's story, for example. She reveals a desperate need to create a refuge in her imagination to escape an unbearable reality. Imagine a child who has to build a parallel world in her mind to bear the pain of being ignored. Child neglect is devastating precisely because it is silent. While many people associate abuse with physical marks, emotional abandonment leaves wounds just as deep, affecting the self-esteem, relationships, and even the identity of those growing up in such environments. After all, how can a child feel valued and secure if the very people who should care for her ignore her most basic needs? I invite you to reflect on these issues with me. Let's delve into the consequences of this type of abandonment and understand the effects of a childhood without essential support. Understanding this impact is a step towards empathy and awareness, which are the first steps towards change. First, we need to understand that child neglect isn't a simple concept. It goes far beyond a lack of food, shelter, or clothing. Neglect, especially emotional neglect, is a profound absence, a lack of the support and affection essential for a child's healthy development. Unlike other forms of abuse that leave visible marks, emotional abandonment hides behind an appearance of normalcy, but leaves scars that can last a lifetime. It's like an emptiness the child can't fill, a space where there should be protection and care. But instead, she finds herself alone, unsupported. This kind of silent abandonment affects the child in ways that often go unnoticed. It robs the child of the chance to develop a stable emotional foundation. The impact gradually reveals itself through insecurities, low self-esteem, and even difficulties in trusting others. The child grows up uncertain of who she is or what she's worth, feeling that her needs and feelings don't matter. This lack of emotional support, although invisible, works like a crack in the foundation of her identity and can affect all her future relationships. But emotional neglect doesn't appear out of nowhere. In many neglectful homes, certain toxic behaviors contribute to this lack of support, deepening the void in the child's life. It's not just the absence of care. It's a toxic, draining presence. These behaviors often shape the family environment in a way that ignores or even invalidates the child's needs, reinforcing feelings of abandonment and helplessness in homes where neglect is routine. Certain toxic behaviors are almost daily occurrences, and their impact is equally destructive. One of the most common examples is parental narcissism, where the parent's needs always come first, leaving the child in the background. Narcissistic parents see their children as extensions of themselves, meaning the child's worth is directly tied to meeting the parent's expectations. This creates a dynamic where the child feels the need to constantly reshape herself to be accepted, never allowing herself to just be. Over time, she develops the belief that her value depends on pleasing others, a cycle that often continues into adulthood. Another destructive behavior is addiction. When a parent is consumed by alcoholism, for instance, they become emotionally unpredictable, incapable of truly being present. The child then grows up in an environment where she never knows what to expect. This kind of behavior creates a constant tension in the home, an atmosphere devoid of emotional safety. She learns to walk on eggshells, trying not to upset her mother or father, even if that means stifling her own needs and desires. This only deepens her emotional isolation and the sense that she is alone. To understand this concretely, we can look at Opal's story. In the short film, Opal lives in a home where her father exhibits narcissistic traits, prioritizing his own desires and needs, while her mother struggles with alcoholism, alternating between moments of presence and complete indifference. This dynamic makes Opal feel constantly invisible, as though her needs don't matter. She's left to create her own inner world, a place in her imagination where she tries to find the security and comfort she lacks in reality. This lack of nurturing, combined with the toxic behaviors in her home, reinforces for Opal the idea that she must seek value and meaning within herself. as her parents don't provide this foundation. Thus, the family environment, rather than being a place of protection, becomes a setting of abandonment, where she starts to believe she is responsible for filling in what's missing. Emotional neglect and toxic behaviors not only leave deep marks, but also shape the way Opal and other neglected children see themselves and the world around them. Living with these toxic behaviors and emotional neglect leaves deep scars, and these scars go far beyond childhood. They penetrate the child's emotional structure, who grows up without the tools needed to develop in a healthy and secure way. The impact of neglect and toxic behaviors affects the child from the inside out, influencing how she sees herself and interacts with the world. When the initial emotional bonds are weak or non-existent, the consequences spill over into all other relationships in life. Children growing up in neglectful environments face a range of emotional and psychological challenges, many of which go unnoticed until the child has already become an adult, struggling to cope with the world. Their emotional and social development is often impaired. They lack the support needed to form secure emotional bonds, which ends up undermining their ability to trust others. Without this foundation, the child learns to withdraw, building barriers to protect herself from the pain of abandonment. Over time, this translates into low self-esteem, relationship difficulties, and a tendency toward isolation. These impacts can be subtle at first, but they become more evident over time. The child begins to question their own worth, constantly feeling less than others. Emotional neglect creates a difficult-to-fill void, and often, they try to compensate for it in ways that end up harming their mental health. In some cases, issues like anxiety, depression, and even self-destructive behaviors develop as an attempt to alleviate the pain of abandonment. Returning to Opal's example, we see that, for her, the real world becomes a hostile and unwelcoming place. She starts to create an imaginary world where she feels safe and loved. In this fantasy space, Opal finds a family that fills the gaps left by her reality. This creation of an idealized family is a response to emotional abandonment, a defense mechanism she uses to compensate for the lack of affection and support at home. But at the same time, this fantasy also reinforces her disconnection from the real world, making it even harder for her to build genuine and secure relationships outside of this idealized world. This type of psychological development, where the child needs to create a parallel reality to feel safe, shows the depth of the impact that emotional abandonment can have. For Opal, the family she imagines symbolizes what she never had: love, understanding, and genuine presence. She needs this illusion to cope with the pain and emptiness. But this search for comfort within her own mind further distances her from the world around her. The defense mechanism we see in Opal, the creation of an imaginary world, is actually a common response among children who face neglect. When reality becomes overwhelming and there is no external support, imagination offers a way out, a refuge where they can feel sheltered and protected, even if only within their own mind. This process not only helps them cope with the present, but also shapes the way these children view the world around them. For many neglected children, creating an imaginary world is not just an innocent game, but a true lifeline. This mental refuge becomes a survival mechanism, a way to escape the cold and lonely reality of their home. When the family environment is marked by emotional absence and abandonment, the child seeks, through imagination, to build a place where they feel safe and accepted. This alternate world serves as a space where they can experience the affection and warmth denied to them in real life. Imagination, in these cases, acts as a bridge between the pain of abandonment and the longing to be loved. It's as if the child creates an idealized version of a family with the qualities and care they feel are missing at home. This process may seem harmless or even healthy at first, but in reality, it deepens the distance between the child and reality, making it even more difficult for them to engage fully with the world. Opal's story helps us understand this dynamic. In the short film, we see how she constructs an imaginary home where she can finally experience a sense of safety and belonging. This symbolic space represents everything she yearns for, a real home where she feels protected and loved. In Opal's fantasy, the imaginary home becomes the place where she finds peace, away from the suffocating and neglectful environment she lives in. It's a reflection of her deepest desire to have a family that sees her and cares for her unconditionally. However, this imaginary construction also brings risks. The child who turns to fantasy to cope with abandonment often starts to rely on this refuge to feel okay, which can make it harder for them to adapt to the real world. Creating a parallel reality offers temporary relief, but at the same time, prevents them from facing painful emotions and seeking external support. Instead of building healthy relationships with others, the child may close themselves off even more, believing the only safe place is the one created in their own mind. Thus, the construction of this imaginary world reveals both the suffering and resilience of the neglected child. Through fantasy, they find an escape from the emptiness they feel, but this escape also risks disconnecting them further from the world, leaving them trapped between what they wish they had and the reality they cannot change. While imagination offers some temporary relief, it cannot hide the small details of daily life that reveal the true extent of neglect. These details, although seemingly subtle, bring to light the difficult reality and unmet needs that the child faces every day. Each sign reinforces the impact of the absence of essential care and deepens the scars left by emotional abandonment. Child neglect, though not always obvious, is reflected in small details that together create a clear picture of abandonment. These signs are often invisible to outsiders, but to the child, they are constant reminders of their reality. The lack of supervision, absence of basic routines, and social isolation are just a few aspects that reveal the situation of neglect. Malnutrition, for example, is one of the most common signs. A child living in a neglectful environment may not have regular access to adequate nutrition. Beyond insufficient nutrition, the lack of basic care, like teaching good hygiene practices or establishing a stable routine, leaves the child at the mercy of their circumstances, as if they have to survive on their own in an environment that should protect them. This leads to a sense of abandonment that goes beyond physical deprivation. They start to believe that their needs are irrelevant. In Opal's short film, we see these signs in a subtle yet powerful way. In a striking scene, Opal is shown holding a burger, but she appears confused, unsure of what to do with it. This small scene reflects a profound absence of common experiences of affection and care, like sharing a meal or having a family routine. Opal is alone, both physically and emotionally, and this detail reinforces the isolation and lack of a nurturing, structured environment. These small, accumulated signs gradually undermine the child's self-esteem, making them believe they don't deserve the care or affection other children receive. The impact of this abandonment shows in the small things missing from their daily life, which, for any child, are essential to building a secure and healthy foundation. The absence of these common experiences transforms the home into an empty, distant space where the child feels constantly isolated and unsupported. These signs of neglect, repeated day after day, lead the child into a reality of loneliness and isolation. This disconnection from the surrounding world doesn't only affect their self-esteem, but also the way they relate to others. Isolation becomes more than a temporary condition. It turns into a psychological state that impacts all their future interactions. For a neglected child, loneliness isn't just the absence of company. It becomes an ingrained experience in how they view the world and those around them, without the emotional support and secure bonds that should be formed at home. The child develops a deep social anxiety. They start to believe they don't belong anywhere, and this feeling of isolation persists well into adulthood. This isolation directly affects their ability to connect with others. Unable to trust, the child begins to see the world with suspicion, as they know no other way to relate. Even when they want to get close to others, the lack of positive and nurturing experiences makes them feel inadequate or out of place. This anxiety about not being accepted leads them to avoid relationships, creating a continuous cycle of loneliness, where the more they avoid contact, the more they feel the lack of connection. Opal's relationship with her home is a clear example of this discomfort. In the short film, we see how the family environment itself makes her feel vulnerable and insecure, rather than a refuge. Opal's home is a place of discomfort and tension, where she finds neither peace nor trust. This lack of comfort and security only increases her anguish, making isolation not just a consequence but an intrinsic feature of her life. This cycle of loneliness and isolation creates a series of emotional difficulties for the child, who always feels distant from others. The lack of healthy interactions during childhood prevents them from developing socialization and communication skills. They grow up not knowing how to build authentic relationships, which only reinforces the idea that they are different, insufficient, or inadequate. Over the years, loneliness becomes a constant companion, a silent legacy of the abandonment they suffered. This experience of loneliness and isolation also impacts something even deeper: the development of their own identity. Without the support of stable and reliable figures, the child begins to question who they truly are, as they lack a secure foundation for building a positive self-image. The home that should offer a solid base becomes a space of doubt and insecurity, directly influencing how the child views their worth and identity. The development of a solid identity is a natural and necessary process in childhood, but it relies on the presence of trustworthy figures and the emotional support children receive. In a neglectful environment where emotional needs are ignored, the child is forced to build an identity amidst emptiness and uncertainty. Without a positive and nurturing reflection of who they are left feeling confused and insecure about their own worth and purpose. Without parents who encourage them to be themselves and value their qualities, the child begins to doubt their own importance. They may feel lost, as though they are constantly trying to fit into an image that doesn't represent who they truly are. The absence of positive feedback and validation reinforces this uncertainty, leading them to seek alternative ways to fill this identity void, often in illusory forms. Once again, Opal offers a clear example of this process. Unable to find emotional support within her family, she turns to creating an imaginary identity, an idealized alter ego that represents a more secure and confident version of herself. This Claire, as Opal imagines herself, is an attempt to escape the reality that suffocates her. This process symbolizes her desperate search for a version of herself that feels valued and accepted as in real life. She lacks a positive reflection to build her identity upon. This internal conflict between the desire to be seen and the lack of external validation becomes a constant struggle. The neglected child, like Opal, grows up feeling they need to invent who they are because no one around them shows interest in discovering their true essence. This fragmented development of identity creates a profound sense of dissatisfaction and an incessant search for something to fill this gap, leading them to constantly question their worth and place in the world. Over time, emotional difficulties and the struggle to build an identity leave marks that go far beyond childhood. These often invisible impacts extend into adulthood, influencing how the person sees themselves and relates to the world around them. The legacy of neglect is deep and lasting, and overcoming these scars requires conscious effort and, often, seeking external help. The wounds left by child neglect do not disappear with time. They accompany the person through life, influencing their relationships, choices, and self-perception. In adulthood, the impact of emotional abandonment manifests in a range of challenges that affect both personal well-being and the ability to build healthy bonds. Self-esteem, often shaken since childhood, can remain fragile, leading to a persistent feeling of insecurity and doubt about one's worth. This lack of confidence reflects in relationships and the way the person views the world. Anxiety, often developed during childhood, lingers as a constant presence, making it difficult to fully trust others. Many times, they find themselves reliving the patterns of isolation and mistrust learned in childhood, which prevents them from establishing authentic and deep connections. This cycle of mistrust and loneliness can create an emotional distance that, while they may want to change, they don't know how to break. However, although the impacts of emotional neglect are long-lasting, they are not insurmountable. Recognizing these patterns and seeking help are crucial steps in building a new emotional foundation. The healing process involves understanding and embracing one's own vulnerabilities, gradually creating a new self-view. Therapy, support from trusted people, and the development of self-care practices are ways to address these wounds and, over time, transform them. Opal's story, like so many other stories of neglect, reminds us that while emotional abandonment leaves scars, there is also the possibility of redefining this experience. With adequate support, it is possible to rebuild self-worth and develop healthier relationships. Overcoming this legacy is a long and often painful journey, but it offers a real chance to break free from the cycle of abandonment and find a new way of living and connecting with others. Every step that a neglected child takes toward adulthood reflects what they experienced, or didn't experience, at home. Child neglect is like a shadow that extends beyond childhood, following them into every decision, every relationship, and, often, every thought about themselves. But within all the pain, there is also a spark of resilience, a capacity to seek support and rewrite their story, even if the path is difficult and lonely. The silence of child neglect is deafening. It echoes in every moment a child spends waiting to be seen, in every longing to be loved that turns into an overwhelming emptiness. Children like Opal don't exist only in stories. They are all around us, carrying in their gaze the marks of a childhood where they should have found care and affection, but instead encountered only cold walls and distant hearts. When we look at this impact, it's not only about understanding, it's about feeling deeply, what it means to grow up without the comforting embrace, the voice that encourages, the look that says, "I'm here for you." The reality is that these invisible wounds are hard to heal, but the desire to move forward, even while carrying these pains, is a testament to human strength. The truth is that this pain will never be simple to overcome. And perhaps, for many, the path to healing will be a lifetime of small steps. But it's possible to find support and new meaning by walking alongside others who understand this pain, who also know the weight of absent love. These connections, built with others who also carry scars, are a way to transform suffering into a silent yet powerful strength. If you found yourself in this story or know someone living it, let this be a reminder. The shadows of the past may be long, but they don't have to define your path. Sometimes, all someone needs is to know that their pain is understood, that they are not alone in this burden. I'm here to tell you that I'm sorry. Feel embraced by me. You did everything you could and are doing the best you can right now. Remember that. May we, as a society, be a voice and a support for those who weren't heard. May we embrace this reality with the depth it deserves, helping to build a world where no child has to search in dreams for what they should find at home.